Welcome to my YouTube channel. Everyone in the cafe froze the moment he spoke, though at first no one even understood why. It was such a simple sound, a low hum of approval, barely louder than a sigh, but coming from him, it sent a strange electricity through the room. Damien Voss, a man whose name traveled like a ghost through the darkest alleys of the city, was sitting alone at a corner table with a cup of cappuccino in front of him. He lifted it with the same calm precision he used when holding a gun. His expression was unreadable as always, carved from stone, untouched by warmth or softness. But when he tasted the coffee, something impossible happened. His eyes closed, his shoulders loosened, and the corner of his mouth twitched upward in what could only be described as, though nobody dared say it, a smile. His men, stationed at various points around the cafe, exchanged stunned looks. This was a man who never smiled, never praised, never showed anything except the cold focus of someone who lived in a world of power and violence. To see that icy exterior crack, even for a heartbeat, felt unreal. Wrong. Dangerous. They shifted uneasily, unsure whether this reaction meant someone was about to be rewarded, or someone was about to die. Damien set the cup down slowly, his fingers lingering on the warm porcelain. He stared at the foam as if it held a secret only he could decipher. For a moment, the world seemed to thicken around him, the hum of conversation thinning into silence. Even the espresso machine behind the counter stopped sputtering, as though it too was holding its breath. The employees watched him carefully from behind the register, their movements stiff, their eyes wide with fear. No one wanted to interrupt whatever was happening. Then the bell above the cafe door chimed. A gust of cold morning air swept in, carrying with it the smell of early rain and pavement. Everyone turned, everyone except Damien, whose eyes were still on his cup. A young woman rushed inside, her apron half-tied, a hairpin dangling loosely from her bun as if she'd gotten ready in a hurry. Her cheeks were flushed, breaths uneven, as though she had run the entire way. She scanned the shop quickly, apologizing to the manager for being late. Something subtle shifted in Damien. He opened his eyes, lifted his head, and looked directly at her. The effect was instant and terrifying. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood up, the sound slicing through the cafe like a blade. His men stiffened, hands drifting instinctively toward their jackets. Customers shrank back, but Damien wasn't focused on any of them. His gaze was locked entirely, intensely, on the girl who had just walked in. She froze under his stare, confusion flickering across her face. She didn't seem to recognize him, which only made the moment more surreal. Her hands fidgeted with the knot of her apron. She felt watched, examined, and she had no idea why. "You," Damien said, his voice deep and rough, cracking through the silence. "You're the one who made this." He gestured slightly toward his cup. She blinked, startled. Yes. I filled in for the morning shift today." He walked toward her, each step slow and deliberate, his presence heavy enough to make the air tighten. She swallowed, backing slightly against the counter. Damien stopped inches from her. His expression held something fierce and unreadable, something dangerously close to awe. He leaned in, voice lower than before. "You're mine." The cafe felt completely still, not a breath, not a whisper, not even the hum of the fridge behind the counter. No one dared move, no one dared speak, and Ava, still clutching the edge of her apron, was left standing beneath the gaze of a man who had just rewritten her entire life with 3 impossible words. Ava's heart hammered so violently she wondered if everyone else could hear it. She had expected her first morning filling in for the sick barista to be stressful, but nothing like this. She thought she would spill a few drinks, fumble with orders, maybe get snapped at by a rushed customer. She never imagined that a man like Damien Voss would step toward her with a look that felt like he could see straight through her skin and into her soul. She hadn't even known who he was at first. She saw the entourage, the black suits, the tension radiating off them, but she thought maybe he was some kind of businessman. It wasn't until she saw people lowering their eyes and avoiding his table that she realized he wasn't someone ordinary. And now he was standing in front of her, closer than any stranger had the right to be, his gaze locked on her like she was something he'd been searching for without knowing it. She forced herself to speak through the dryness in her throat. I really don't understand. Did I do something wrong with your drink?" Damien's eyes flickered down to the cappuccino he had set on the counter between them. He touched the rim lightly, as though it mattered more than anyone else could comprehend. Wrong, he repeated, his tone unreadable. No, you did something right. The way he said it made her breath catch. His voice, low and gravelly, held a kind of reverence that didn't belong in the mouth of a man like him. It sent a shiver up her arms. He took another step closer, and she instinctively pressed back against the counter, her fingers gripping the edge for balance. She wasn't sure if she was frightened of him or of the strange, magnetic pull in his presence that made it impossible to look away. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ava," she whispered. He repeated it softly, almost silently, as if testing how it felt in his mouth. Ava had never heard her own name sound so intense. "Ava," he said again, firmer. "You made this drink." She nodded. "I followed the recipe. That's all." Damien shook his head once, slowly, as though the idea itself insulted him. "No, anyone can follow a recipe." This was different. His men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging subtle glances. It was clear they weren't used to hearing him speak this much, let alone speak like this. But Damien wasn't paying attention to them. His focus stayed solely on Ava, and the weight of it made her chest tighten. He rested his hand flat on the counter beside her, leaning in just enough for her to catch the faint scent of cedar and smoke clinging to his coat. "This coffee," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "is the first thing in years that has reminded me of my mother." Ava's breath stilled. She didn't know anything about his past, but the moment he mentioned his mother, something fragile and haunted flickered behind his eyes. It was enough to silence any fear she had, replacing it with something else, something dangerous, something curious. "I didn't mean to upset you," she said softly. "You didn't." He exhaled, and the sound carried a richness of emotion a man like him wasn't supposed to have. "You reminded me what it feels like to not be hollow." Her pulse stumbled. She had no idea what to say to a confession like that, especially from a man who looked like he could destroy a city with a single decision. He straightened slightly, though he remained close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Ava, listen carefully." The tone of his voice shifted, not threatening, but absolute. "You walk out of this cafe, and I'll follow. You try to run, and I'll find you." Her breath hitched. "Why?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because the moment I tasted that cup," he said, his gaze piercing hers, "I knew you were the one thing I didn't know I needed." Ava felt the room tilt around her. She knew she should be terrified. She knew she should scream, run, push him away. But something in his eyes, something raw, almost desperate, held her frozen. Damien Voss, the man the city feared, the man no one dared look in the eye, was staring at her like she was the first warm thing he had touched in years. And that terrified her more than anything else. Ava expected him to disappear after that day, to return to whatever world of shadows and power he lived in. She thought maybe he was just having a strange moment, some emotional memory triggered by a simple cup of coffee. But the very next morning, as she tied her apron and prepared the espresso machine, she felt a shift in the air even before the cafe door opened. She didn't have to look to know it was him. His presence moved like a ripple through the room. Damien Voss walked in with the same deliberate calm he always carried, but this time his eyes sought only one thing, her. Her stomach tightened as he approached his usual table, a seat he had never noticed before the day she arrived, and sat down without a word. His men took their positions again, just as tense as before. Customers whispered into their sleeves, pretending not to stare. Ava tried to focus on her work, but her hands trembled as she reached for the milk jug. He didn't need to say what he wanted. She already knew. She crafted the cappuccino with slow care, measuring each movement like it was being watched, which it was. When she carried it to his table, she felt his gaze tracking her every step. He didn't thank her. He didn't smile. He just lifted the cup, tasted it, and closed his eyes like he had before. Then he exhaled, a soft, controlled breath that sounded far too close to relief. Ava stood frozen, unsure whether she should walk away or sit down or run out the door. But Damien opened his eyes and looked at her with a sharpness that pinned her in place. "Stay," he said quietly. She swallowed. I'm working." "I know," he replied, voice deep and steady. "But stay for a moment." Something in the tone made it impossible for her to refuse. She slid into the seat across from him, her apron still dusted with coffee grounds, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. Damien watched her hands intently, then lifted his gaze to her face with an almost studying intensity. You have steady hands, he said. She glanced at her own trembling fingers and almost laughed. Not today. You don't understand, he said, leaning forward slightly. Most people shake when they're in front of me. They lose control. Their breathing changes. Their voices break. But you don't. Not in the ways that matter. A flicker of heat crawled up her neck. I'm not brave, she whispered. No, Damien said softly. You're honest. There's a difference. After that morning, he came every day. Sometimes twice a day. Sometimes he sat in silence, sometimes he watched her work, and sometimes he spoke in low, brief sentences that felt like glimpses into someone he didn't show the rest of the world. Ava learned that he didn't trust easily. That he rarely slept. That his childhood was a closed door he refused to open, except when he talked about his mother. When he did, his voice changed. Softened. Broke in ways he didn't seem to notice. She also learned that he was dangerous in ways she couldn't fully understand. Men followed him everywhere. Tension shadowed him like a second skin. Some nights, when he came in late, there was dried blood on his cuff or a cut on his knuckle that hadn't been there that morning. But he always looked at her the same way, like she was the only solid thing in a world built out of smoke. One evening, long after the dinner rush had died down, Ava was wiping tables when she heard his steps approach. She didn't look up until she felt him stop beside her. He rarely initiated conversations beyond ordering his drink, but something was different tonight. I wasn't supposed to be here today, he said quietly. She turned, cloth in hand, unsure how to respond. What do you mean? Damien's eyes flicked toward the rain-streaked window, as if watching something only he could see. There was business to handle. A meeting that should have kept me all night. He paused. But I left. I walked out. Why? She asked before she could stop herself. He looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze softened into something raw. Because I felt it again. She swallowed. Felt what? He tapped two fingers against his chest, right over his heart. That emptiness. The kind that makes a man believe he's dying even when he isn't. Ava's breath hitched. She hadn't expected him to be this honest. He leaned closer, his voice becoming a whisper. But when I'm here, when I taste what you make, when I hear your voice, the emptiness quiets. Her fingers tightened around the cloth, her nerves trembling. Damien. He reached out, not grabbing, not demanding, but gently, cautiously, and took her hand. The touch was warm, solid, almost reverent. For a moment, the world held still. Then he said the words that made her chest ache in ways she didn't understand. You make me feel alive, Ava. The night the world shifted began quietly, so quietly Ava didn't sense anything wrong at first. The cafe was nearly empty, the rain beating steadily against the windows like a tired drummer. She preferred closing shifts. There was something peaceful about wiping down counters while the lights glowed softly and the air smelled of warm pastries and roasted beans. Damien hadn't come in that evening, and a small part of her felt strangely uneasy about it, though she tried to ignore the feeling. She was humming under her breath when the front door slammed open with a violent force that rattled the glass. 3 men rushed inside, dripping with rainwater, their eyes sharp and poisonous. The moment Ava saw the glint of metal in their hands, her blood turned cold. Lock the door, one of them barked. Her fingers trembled as she backed away, but she didn't touch anything. She couldn't move. She couldn't think past the pulse thundering in her ears. These weren't customers. Their expressions were too full of intent, dark, focused, cruel. The tallest of them stepped forward, his boots leaving muddy streaks across the clean floor. Where is he? He demanded. Ava didn't need to ask who. Her voice barely escaped her throat. I don't know. He smirked as if he expected the answer. That's all right. He'll come to you. He always does. She felt her stomach drop. They knew. They had been watching, following, waiting. Another man moved behind the counter with a predator's ease, knocking cups to the floor as he searched for something, anything. Ava flinched as ceramics shattered around her feet. You know, sweetheart, he said with a twisted smile, you picked the wrong man to impress. Ava tried to run toward the back, but the third man grabbed her wrist with a crushing grip. She gasped, struggling, but his hand clamped over her mouth as he pulled her against him. Panic clawed up her throat. She kicked, thrashed, but he was too strong. Stop fighting, he hissed. He'll be here soon. We just need you alive long enough to bait him. Alive, not unharmed. A tear slipped down her cheek. Then, Somewhere beyond the storm and the rattling windows, she heard a sound. A heavy thud. Another. And then the unmistakable crash of something metal hitting the pavement. The men froze. A second later, the back door of the cafe slammed open so violently it nearly tore off its hinges. Damien stood in the doorway, rain pouring off him, his chest rising and falling like he had run through hell itself. His eyes locked on Ava instantly. Everything went silent. There was no warning, no negotiation. Damien moved like a knife made of pure fury. The men reacted too late. Gunshots exploded, echoing off the walls, glass shattered, tables toppled. Ava screamed behind the hand that covered her mouth. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the chaos in staccato bursts. Damien fought like a man who had already lost too much in his life. His movements were precise, deadly, terrifying, and every strike, every shot, every roar of violence was aimed at getting to her. When the last attacker went down, the cafe fell silent except for the hiss of steam from the ruined espresso machine and the heavy rain outside. Damien dropped to his knees in front of her, blood streaking down his arm. His hands were trembling when he cupped her face. "Ava," he breathed, voice cracking. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears falling freely. I thought you were." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the only thing tethering him to the world. His breath shuddered against her hair. "This is why I told you you're mine." His voice was raw, stripped of every layer of power he usually wore. "Because losing you would destroy me in ways death never could." Ava pressed her forehead to his, the world spinning around them. "You could have died. For you," he whispered, brushing his thumb against her trembling lips. "I'd die 1,000 times." The cafe was ruined, glass scattered like fallen stars around them, the night still raging outside. But none of it mattered. Not when she leaned in and kissed him, soft and fierce, sealing something between them that neither guns nor blood nor fear could ever undo. And in that broken, rain-soaked cafe, Damien Voss, feared by all, untouchable by many, realized with aching clarity that she wasn't just someone he had chosen. She was someone he could never let go of. And for the first time in his life, he finally understood what it meant to have something worth living for.